The Siberian wind did not just blow. It screamed. It tore across the frozen expanse of the Altai Mountains, carrying shards of ice that could strip the paint from a tractor. In a remote, weather-beaten cabin miles from the nearest semblance of civilization, 72-year-old Agatha Cromwell sat by her cast-iron stove. Agatha was no stranger to isolation. After her husband, Robert, a dedicated glaciologist, passed away 5 years prior, she had chosen to remain in their research cabin. The harsh, unforgiving landscape was the only place that still held his memory. She survived on grit, canned supplies, and a stubborn refusal to let the elements dictate her fate. But the blizzard of February 2024 was different. The thermometer nailed outside her frosted window read -40 degrees Celsius. The cold was a physical weight pressing against the timber walls. Just past midnight, an anomalous sound breached the howling wind. It was not the rhythmic thud of a loose shutter or the crack of freezing timber. It was a low, guttural wail, desperate and ragged. Agatha hesitated. Stepping into a Siberian blizzard was a fool's errand. Yet, the sound came again, weaker this time. She reached for Robert's old Winchester rifle, wrapped herself in a heavy shearling coat, and pushed the heavy oak door open against the snowdrift. The beam of her flashlight cut through the swirling white chaos, illuminating a smear of crimson on the fresh snow. Agatha followed the blood trail toward her cordwood shed, her breath freezing instantly on her scarf. Beneath the meager shelter of the shed's overhang lay a creature of near mythical rarity, a female snow leopard. The ghost of the mountains was a mess of matted silver fur and dark rosettes, panting shallowly. But it was not the cold that had brought the apex predator to Agatha's doorstep. Wrapped tight around the leopard's left hind leg was a brutal, braided steel poacher's snare. The wire had bitten deep into the muscle, the surrounding flesh blackened and infected. The majestic cat was dying of blood loss, sepsis, and hypothermia. Then, Agatha saw the reason the mother had kept walking. Tucked safely beneath the leopard's chin, shielded from the wind by her mother's failing body heat, was a tiny, shivering cub. It could not have been more than a few weeks old. The mother leopard raised her heavy head. Her pale, gold eyes locked onto Agatha's. There was no aggression in that gaze, only a profound, exhausted plea. "All right," Agatha whispered to the wind, lowering her rifle. "All right. I'm not going to hurt you." Getting a 90-pound, injured predator into an enclosed space was a logistical nightmare. Agatha quickly retrieved a heavy canvas sled used for hauling firewood. Moving with agonizing slowness to avoid triggering the animal's defensive instincts, she nudged the sled beside the leopard. "Come on," Agatha coaxed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. "You have to move." Whether driven by maternal instinct or sheer desperation, the snow leopard dragged herself onto the canvas, keeping her cub firmly in her mouth. Agatha, muscles burning and joints aching with arthritis, hauled the sled into the relative warmth of her enclosed mudroom. The immediate threat was the snare. If Agatha didn't remove it, the necrotic tissue would kill the mother, leaving the cub to freeze. She fetched her heavy-duty bolt cutters, a bottle of iodine, and a roll of clean bandages. Kneeling beside the lethal predator, Agatha felt the raw, terrifying power of the animal. One snap of those jaws could shatter her arm. She placed a trembling hand on the leopard's flank. The cat tensed, a low rumble vibrating in her chest, but she did not strike. Agatha aligned the heavy iron jaws of the bolt cutters over the bloody steel wire. With a sharp exhale, she squeezed the handles with all her remaining strength. The wire snapped with a loud ping. The leopard flinched violently, but Agatha held her ground, quickly flushing the horrific wound with iodine and wrapping it tight. She slid a bowl of warm, watered-down canned milk toward the cub and a slab of thawed venison toward the mother. For a moment, there was peace in the mudroom. But the wilderness rarely allows for a quiet rescue. The storm reached a terrifying crescendo outside, rattling the cabin's foundation. Suddenly, the distinct, heavy thud of fists pounding on the front door echoed through the hallway. Agatha froze. No neighbor would be out in this weather, and the nearest village was 60 miles away. She secured the mudroom door, ensuring the leopards were hidden, and walked to the entryway, the Winchester rifle gripped tightly in her hands. She opened the door a fraction. 2 men stood on the porch, covered in snow, their faces obscured by heavy balaclavas. Our snowmobile broke down. The taller man shouted over the wind, his accent thick and grating. "We need shelter." Agatha hesitated, but leaving men to die in the cold was not in her nature. She stepped back, allowing them into the main living area. They pulled off their masks, revealing wind-burned, hardened faces. The taller one introduced himself as Arthur, the shorter, barrel-chested man as Lloyd. They claimed to be geologists, surveying the ridge. As Agatha turned to pour them hot tea, her eyes caught a detail that made her blood run cold. Hanging from Arthur's heavy leather belt was a coil of thick, braided steel wire. It was an exact match to the snare she had just cut from the snow leopard's leg. Furthermore, she noticed a distinct smear of fresh blood on the toe of Lloyd's right boot. These were not geologists. They were poachers. They had been tracking the injured mother leopard through the blizzard, knowing the bloody trail would eventually stop. And the trail had led directly to Agatha's cabin. "You're out late for surveying," Agatha noted, her voice deceivingly calm as she set 2 mugs on the table. Arthur's eyes darted around the cabin. "Storm caught us off guard. Did you happen to hear anything outside tonight, Mrs. Cromwell? Wild dogs, maybe?" He was fishing. He knew the leopard was near. Agatha's mind raced. 2 desperate, armed men against an old woman. If they found the pelts they were looking for in her mudroom, they would not leave witnesses. She needed a twist to level the playing field. "No dogs," Agatha said, deliberately stepping back until she was standing next to her heavy oak desk. "But it's a good thing you found me." Dr. Henry Gable, from the Regional Wildlife Trust, just radioed. He's stationed 10 miles out with a Border Patrol unit. They tracked a distress beacon from a poached animal to this exact grid. They are on their way here right now on tracked snowcats. Arthur and Lloyd froze. The mention of the Border Patrol, notorious for their ruthless handling of poachers, shifted the atmosphere in the room instantly. "Is that so?" Lloyd muttered, his hand instinctively dropping toward the hunting knife on his belt. In a fraction of a second, Agatha racked the lever of the Winchester. The metallic clack-clack echoed like a cannon shot in the small room. She raised the barrel, aiming directly at Arthur's chest. "Yes, it is," Agatha said, her voice dropping the facade of the sweet old widow. "And I highly suggest you fix your snowmobile before they arrive. I don't harbor criminals." The poachers stared down the barrel of the rifle, calculating their odds. The old woman's hands were completely steady. With a string of muted curses, Arthur grabbed his coat. "We're leaving," he spat. The 2 men backed out the door, disappearing back into the lethal whiteout. Agatha locked the deadbolt, her knees finally giving out as she slid to the floor, gasping for air. By 3 a.m., the cabin's generator, choked by ice, finally sputtered and died. The lights went out, and the electric heating elements went cold. The cast-iron stove in the living room was not enough to heat the mudroom where the leopards lay. Agatha knew the injured, blood-depleted mother could not survive the dropping temperatures, and the cub would freeze in hours. Gathering every down comforter and wool blanket she owned, she moved into the pitch-black mudroom. She arranged the blankets in a heavy pile and, with immense trepidation, slid underneath them, right next to the snow leopard. The great cat stiffened, her golden eyes reflecting the faint moonlight slipping through the frosted window. But as Agatha's body heat radiated through the blankets, the leopard let out a long, shuddering breath. The mother rested her heavy, scarred chin on Agatha's knee. The tiny cub, seeking the warmest spot, wiggled its way between Agatha's ribs and the mother's belly. For the rest of the night, the 3 of them lay huddled together in the dark. Agatha listened to the rhythmic, diesel engine rumble of the leopard's purr, a surreal lullaby against the screaming wind outside. She kept her hand over the cub, feeling the rapid, fragile beat of its heart. In that freezing darkness, the boundary between human and wild beast dissolved entirely. They were simply 3 creatures fighting to see the dawn. The storm broke just as the sun crested the Altai peaks, painting the snow-covered world in brilliant hues of pink and gold. Agatha was awakened by the crackle of her battery-operated emergency radio. It was Dr. Henry Gable, conducting routine wellness checks on the isolated residents. Agatha grabbed the receiver, her fingers stiff from the cold. "Henry," she rasped. I need an airlift. And bring medical supplies. Large animal. Within 3 hours. The rhythmic chopping of a helicopter blade cut through the crisp morning air. Dr. Gable and a team of veterinary specialists rushed into the cabin. They found Agatha sitting in the mudroom, sipping tea, while a heavily sedated snow leopard lay bandaged on a stretcher, her cub sleeping safely in a heated transport box. Dr. Gable examined the wound, then looked at the severed steel snare on the floor. He looked at the 72-year-old widow in disbelief. Agatha, he breathed, shaking his head. You saved a species today. If infection had set in completely, or if those poachers had found her, we would have lost a crucial bloodline. 2 months later, under the bright, clear skies of early spring, Agatha stood on a ridge with Dr. Gable's team. They watched as the metal door of a transport cage was lifted. The mother leopard, a slight limp the only reminder of her ordeal, bounded out onto the rocky terrain. Behind her, the cub, now plump and energetic, tumbled out, chasing its mother's tail. Before disappearing over the craggy peak, the ghost of the mountains paused. She turned her massive head, her golden eyes locking onto Agatha one final time across the expanse. Then, with a flick of her long, thick tail, she vanished into the wild. Agatha smiled, pulling her shearling coat tighter against the wind. The silence of the Altai Mountains returned, but for the first time since Robert's death, it no longer felt empty.